I call the member for Wakefield.
Well, thank you, Deputy Speaker, and it's a great pleasure to speak on this motion, and I congratulate the member for Brisbane for bringing it to the Parliament, and obviously welcome its support by the opposition, the member for Sydney, and note the rare moments of unanimity with my colleague, the member for Berowra. Obviously, Eastern Europe has had an interesting history, but one thing that has been consistent for a very long time, up until the beginning of this century or the late end of the last century, was that people were ruled by one tyrant or another for a very long period of time. And democracy and liberty and freedom have only really recently graced these lands. So this is a rare and unique opportunity, but it is coloured, I guess, by history. Now, there are four principles I think that we should apply to the Ukraine, and the first and foremost is that they have the right to select their own government through free and fair elections, and that that government should be free of corruption and kleptocracy. There should be a right to protest, and they have the right, if you like, to decide the future of their country. They should have the right to choose their own foreign policy. That seems to me to be a fundamental right in a nation-state. Obviously, every nation, when it's choosing its foreign policy, takes into regard its neighbours and their interests as well. But, one of the fundamental things a nation-state can do is choose its own foreign policy. And if the Ukraine want to join the European Union or have good relationships with Europe, that should be something that nation is free to do. And fourthly, they have the right to their own territorial integrity. Now, these borders have been established for the last 23 years. They are not some new invention, and it is Ukrainians who should decide the future of those borders and not anybody else. Now, what weighs over all of this is, of course, Russia. And Russia has legitimate national, economic and security interests in the region that need to be taken into account and need to be taken into regard. And history weighs on those. But Russia should not annex territory, and that includes the Crimea. And it cannot place troops into its neighbours' territory outside of those bases which have been agreed to in previous agreements. And the member for Sydney went through those agreements. And it should definitely not have armed personnel in uniform but without insignia outside those authorised bases. Now, that is a very, very distressing precedent to set, a very, very distressing precedent to set, because one of the key things about having armed forces is that you can identify them, and one of the most distressing precedents is that we had soldiers running around without any insignia, with no clear chain of command that the world could identify. And so it became very hard, I think, to pinpoint on whose authority they were acting officially, at least if we knew or suspected that they were acting under the command of the Russian president. That Russia should not seek to use the Russian language or ethnicity as a reason for breaching territorial integrity of nation-states. And this would be a recipe for disaster if it was allowed to stand as a principle, and it would be as disastrous as when it was previously invoked as a principle in the case of the Sudetenland. It is a very, very dangerous precedent to set, and we should not allow it to be set. We should not allow Russia to support separatism within Ukraine's autonomous regions as a method of expanding Russia's borders. It is, again, a very old-fashioned, as the member for Berowra's talked about, a very old-fashioned way of doing foreign policy. And Russia should accept international law and the UN Security Council's legitimate concerns about its behaviour and withdraw their veto about the Crimean referendum. Ukraine has a short independent history, just 23 years, and that history means that those in Ukraine do have an obligation to govern wisely with a view to peace and stability within the region. And that means taking Russia into account, but not being dominated by it. They have a right, the Ukrainians have a right to liberty and freedom and democracy, and these things cannot be expressed if they're under the yoke of foreign domination or foreign threat. And so I urge the UN to act, and I congratulate the member for Brisbane for bringing this to the House.
I thank the member for Wakefield.